Emily Thompson adjusted her police cap as she stepped out of the station into the crisp morning air. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her badge against her chest, a constant reminder of her duty, her commitment to keeping the community safe. As she slid into her patrol car, Emily ran through her mental checklist. Everything had to be in order. Rules were rules, and she prided herself on following them to the letter. With the engine on, she pulled out onto the street, her eyes scanning the sidewalks and storefronts. Another day, another dollar, she muttered to herself, a hint of weariness in her voice. As Emily drove through the neighborhood, she noticed a group of teenagers loitering outside a convenience store. Her jaw tightened. She slowed the car, scrutinizing them with suspicion. They weren't doing anything wrong, not technically, but their presence made her uneasy. "Move along," she called out through the window, her voice stern. The teenagers glanced at her, surprise and annoyance flashing across their faces, before they shuffled away, grumbling under their breath. Emily felt a pang of satisfaction. Rules were rules, and loitering was against city ordinances. She was just doing her job, keeping things in order. Further down the street, she saw an elderly man struggling with some grocery bags. For a moment, she considered stopping to help, but then she shook her head. That wasn't her job. She was here to enforce the law, not to play the Good Samaritan. As the morning wore on, Emily found herself growing increasingly irritated. A jaywalker here, a car parked slightly over the line there. It seemed like everywhere she looked, people were bending or breaking the rules. Don't they get it? She thought to herself. These rules are here for a reason. If everyone just followed them, things would be so much easier. By lunchtime, Emily had handed out 3 tickets and issued countless warnings. She felt exhausted but also justified. She was doing her part to keep the community in line, to maintain order in a chaotic world. As she pulled into the parking lot of a local restaurant for her lunch break, Emily caught a glimpse of herself in the rearview mirror. She saw a woman dedicated to her work, committed to upholding the law. But there was something else there too, a hardness in her eyes that she didn't recognize. For just a moment, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. Was she being too rigid, too unforgiving? But she quickly pushed the thought aside. No, she was doing what was right. She was following the rules just as everyone else should. As the sun dipped low in the sky, Emily's shift finally came to an end. She let out a tired sigh, her shoulders sagging slightly as she stepped out of her patrol car. The day had been long, filled with minor infractions and petty rule-breaking, but now it was time to take care of her own needs. Emily headed to the local grocery store, the fluorescent lights inside a stark contrast to the darkening night outside. She grabbed a basket and began wandering the aisles, her eyes scanning the shelves for the items on her mental list. As she entered the cereal aisle, something caught her eye. A young black girl stood there looking lost and confused. Emily's eyes narrowed as she watched the girl pick up a box, study it closely, and then put it back with trembling hands. What's she up to? Emily thought, her instincts as a cop kicking in. The girl, Lila Richards, though Emily didn't know her name, moved slowly down the aisle, her eyes darting around, never settling on one spot for too long. To Emily it seemed suspicious, too suspicious. Her hand instinctively moved to where her badge would be, but of course she was off duty now. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She pretended to study the nutritional facts on a box of store-brand flakes while keeping Lila in her peripheral vision. Lila picked up another box, this time holding it close to her face as if she was having trouble reading the label. Emily's suspicion deepened. Was she looking for security cameras, planning to steal? As Lila moved to the next aisle, Emily followed, her own shopping forgotten. She watched as the young girl's hands trembled slightly while she picked up a can of soup. Emily's jaw clenched. In her mind, this was textbook suspicious behavior. With every passing moment, Emily's certainty grew. She was convinced that Lila was up to no good, even though she hadn't actually seen her do anything wrong. But Emily knew Lila Richards and her father. Mr. Samuel Richards had entered the grocery store earlier that evening. A respected businessman, Mr. Richards was there to inspect the store for potential renovations. He had left Lila near the front of the store, promising to return soon. "I'll only be a few minutes, sweetheart," he had said with a gentle smile. "Why don't you look around while you wait?" Lila had nodded, trying to hide her nervousness. She wasn't used to being alone in unfamiliar places, but she didn't want to disappoint her father. As Mr. Richards disappeared down an aisle with the store manager, Lila took a deep breath and decided to explore. At first, Lila wandered slowly, captivated by the colorful displays and neatly stacked shelves. But as time passed, the bustling store began to overwhelm her. The fluorescent lights felt too bright, the chatter of other shoppers too loud. Lila's heart started to race as she realized she no longer knew where she was. She turned down one aisle, then another, each one looking identical to the last. The product labels blurred together, and Lila found herself picking up items just to have something to focus on. Her hand trembled as she tried to read the ingredients on a cereal box, the words swimming before her eyes. "Where am I?" she thought, panic rising in her chest. "Where's Dad?" Lila moved faster now, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. She barely noticed the concerned looks from other customers as she passed by them, her eyes darting frantically in search of any sign of her father. The store seemed to grow larger with every step, the aisles stretching endlessly before her. Lila's anxiety peaked as she realized she couldn't even remember which direction she had come from. Tears pricked at her eyes as she clutched a can of soup, her hands shaking visibly. "Dad," she whispered, her voice lost in the noise of the store. "Where are you?" Emily's eyes narrowed as she continued to watch Lila. The girl's erratic movements and nervous behavior only fueled Emily's suspicions. She observed as Lila picked up items only to put them back moments later, her hands trembling noticeably. "This doesn't look good," Emily murmured under her breath, her jaw tightening. As a police officer, Emily prided herself on her ability to spot trouble before it happened. In her mind, Lila's behavior checked all the boxes of a potential shoplifter. The constant wandering, the fidgeting with products, the quick glances around. Everything seemed to point to guilt in Emily's eyes. Taking a deep breath, Emily straightened her posture and walked purposefully towards Lila, her hand instinctively brushing her hip where her badge usually rested, a habit born from years on the force. "Excuse me," Emily called out, her voice sharp and authoritative. Lila jumped at the sudden address, nearly dropping the can she was holding. She turned to face Emily, her eyes wide with surprise and fear. Emily's tone was immediately accusatory as she spoke. "What exactly are you doing here? You've been wandering these aisles for a while now." Lila opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her hands shook even more visibly now, and she clutched the can tighter to her chest. Emily's eyes narrowed further. "Well, I asked you a question. What are you doing in this store?" Lila's heart pounded as she struggled to find her voice, the stern look on Emily's face only making her more nervous, causing her words to come out in a confused jumble. "I'm waiting for my dad," Lila stammered, her eyes darting around the store. "He's here somewhere." Emily's eyebrows furrowed, her frustration growing with each passing second. She didn't believe a word of it. "Your dad? And where exactly is he? I haven't seen anyone looking for you." Lila's hands trembled as she tried to explain that he was checking out the store for work. "I got lost," she managed to say. Emily's patience was wearing thin. She stepped closer to Lila, her voice rising slightly. "That's not a very convincing story. Why don't you tell me what you're really doing?" Other shoppers began to notice the tense exchange. Some people slowed down their carts, pretending to examine nearby products while casting furtive glances at the unfolding scene. Lila felt the weight of their stares, which only increased her anxiety. She tried to take a deep breath, but it came out shaky and uneven. "Please," she whispered, "I'm telling the truth. I got confused. The store is so big." Emily wasn't buying it. Her years of experience had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now, those instincts were screaming that something was wrong. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me," she said firmly, reaching for Lila's arm. Lila flinched, her eyes wide with fear. "No, please, I didn't do anything wrong." The commotion was drawing more attention now. An elderly couple whispered to each other, shaking their heads in disapproval. A young mother pulled her child closer, watching the scene warily. Emily's voice grew louder, her frustration evident. "If you haven't done anything wrong, then you have nothing to worry about. Now come with me so we can sort this out." Tears welled up in Lila's eyes as she desperately scanned the store, hoping to catch a glimpse of her father. "Dad," she called out weakly, her voice choked with emotion. "Dad, where are you?" Emily's patience had finally run out. Her voice took on a commanding tone as she pointed at Lila's small shoulder bag. "Empty your bag now." Lila's eyes widened in disbelief. "But I didn't take anything," she protested faintly, her voice barely above a whisper. "If that's true, then you have nothing to hide," Emily insisted, her posture rigid and unyielding. "Show me what's in your bag." With trembling hands, Lila fumbled with the zipper of her bag. Her anxiety made her fingers clumsy, and she struggled to open it. The more she fumbled, the more suspicious Emily became. "Come on, hurry up," Emily demanded, her tone sharp with impatience. By now, a small crowd had gathered around them, curious onlookers watching the scene unfold, their faces a mixture of concern and judgment. Lila could feel their eyes on her, which only made her more nervous. "I'm trying," Lila said, her voice quavering as tears began to form in her eyes. She finally managed to open the bag, but in her haste, she accidentally dropped it. The contents spilled onto the floor: a small wallet, a phone, some tissues, and a few other personal items. Emily quickly knelt down to examine the scattered belongings, her eyes scanning for anything suspicious. Lila stood frozen, watching helplessly as the officer rifled through her personal items. The spectators murmured among themselves, some shaking their heads while others whispered their theories about what was happening. Lila felt exposed and vulnerable, wishing she could just disappear. "See," Lila said softly, her voice trembling, "I told you I didn't take anything." But Emily wasn't satisfied. She stood up, her eyes narrowing. "Turn out your pockets," she demanded. Lila's hands shook as she complied, pulling out the linings of her empty pockets. Tears were now streaming freely down her cheeks, and she struggled to hold back her sobs. The situation had become unbearably uncomfortable for Lila. She felt humiliated and scared, surrounded by strangers who were watching her every move. She glanced around desperately, hoping to see the familiar face of her father in the crowd, but he was nowhere to be found. As the tense scene unfolded, Mr. Samuel Richards emerged from the back of the store, having just finished his inspection. He immediately noticed the commotion near the front and quickened his pace. His heart sank when he recognized his daughter at the center of it all. "Lila," he shouted, pushing his way through the crowd. "What's going on here?" The sight that greeted him was enough to make his blood boil. His daughter was trembling, tears streaming down her face, her belongings scattered on the floor. A stern-looking police officer loomed over her, while curious onlookers watched the scene. "Lila, sweetheart," Mr. Richards said softly, placing a protective arm around his daughter's shoulders. He turned to Emily, his eyes blazing with anger and disbelief. "Officer, what is the meaning of this?" Emily straightened her posture, her voice firm as she addressed Mr. Richards. "Sir, I caught this young woman behaving suspiciously. I have reason to believe she may have been shoplifting." Mr. Richards' jaw clenched, his voice low and controlled as he spoke. "Shoplifting? My daughter? That's absurd. Lila would never do such a thing." "With all due respect, sir," Emily continued, her tone unwavering, "I watched her wandering aimlessly around the store for an extended period. When questioned, she became nervous and evasive." Mr. Richards looked down at his daughter, who was now clinging to him. Her body trembled with silent sobs. A wave of protective anger surged through him. "Officer," he said, his voice rising slightly, "my daughter has social anxiety. She gets nervous in unfamiliar places. I was inspecting the store for renovations and asked her to wait for me. That's all that was happening here." Emily's expression faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. Even so, her behavior was suspicious enough to warrant an investigation. "I was simply doing my job." Mr. Richards took a deep breath, struggling to maintain his composure. "Your job?" he echoed, his voice thick with emotion. "Your job is to protect and serve, not to harass innocent people based on unfounded suspicions." The onlookers shifted uncomfortably, some nodding in agreement with Mr. Richards' words. Emily glanced around, suddenly aware of the crowd's changing mood. "I understand that you're upset, sir," Emily said, her voice losing some of its previous conviction, "but I had to follow protocol." "Protocol?" Mr. Richards interrupted, his voice heavy with emotion. "Is it protocol to publicly humiliate a young woman without any evidence of wrongdoing? To make her empty her bag and turn out her pockets in front of strangers?" Mr. Richards exhaled deeply, his anger giving way to a weary sadness. He looked at Emily, his eyes filled with a mixture of disappointment and resolve. "Officer," he began, his voice firm and clear, "I think there's been a serious misunderstanding here. Lila wasn't wandering around because she was up to something. She was here with me." Emily frowned, confusion replacing her earlier certainty. "With you? But I didn't see." Mr. Richards nodded patiently. "I'm here to finalize some renovation plans for the store. I'm the new owner, you see. Lila came along to keep me company, but she's not used to places like this." He gently squeezed Lila's shoulder and she looked up at him gratefully. "My daughter has social anxiety. Being in busy, unfamiliar places can be overwhelming for her. She was probably just trying to find a quiet spot while she waited for me." As Mr. Richards spoke, Emily's demeanor began to change. The stern mask of authority she wore slowly crumbled, replaced by a growing realization. She looked at Lila, really looked at her for the first time, and saw not a suspicious character but a frightened young woman. "I didn't know," Emily stammered, her previous confidence evaporating. "I just thought." "I know what you thought, officer," Mr. Richards said, his voice softening. "But sometimes things aren't what they seem at first glance." Emily's eyes darted between Mr. Richards, Lila, and the scattered contents of Lila's bag on the floor. The weight of her actions began to sink in, and a sense of unease settled in her stomach. "Oh no," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "What have I done?" The crowd around them fell silent, watching the scene unfold with a mix of sympathy and embarrassment. Emily could feel their eyes on her, judging her, and she knew she had made a terrible mistake. Her heart sank as she looked at Lila's terrified face, the young woman's eyes wide with fear, her hands trembling as she clung to her father. In that moment, the reality of Emily's actions hit her like a ton of bricks. "I'm so sorry," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. A lump formed in her throat as shame washed over her. How could she have been so quick to judge? Mr. Richards gently stroked Lila's hair, murmuring soft words of comfort. Then he turned to Emily, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "Officer Thompson," he said, his voice firm but not harsh, "I hope you understand the damage that assumptions like yours can cause." Emily nodded, unable to speak. Mr. Richards continued, "My daughter came here today to spend time with me, but instead, she was humiliated and frightened to death, all because of how she looks and how her anxiety made her act." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she listened. She wanted to look away, to hide from the truth in his words, but she forced herself to meet Mr. Richards' gaze. "This isn't just about today," Mr. Richards went on. "It's about a lifetime of experiences like this. It's about people making snap judgments based on nothing but appearances and prejudice." Emily felt each word like a physical blow. She had always prided herself on being a good officer, on protecting people, but now she saw how her own biases had turned her into exactly the kind of threat she had sworn to protect others from. "I never meant to," Emily began, but the words died in her throat. What could she say? That she didn't mean to hurt anyone, that she was just doing her job? She knew those excuses sounded hollow. Mr. Richards nodded, as if he understood her unspoken thoughts. "I know you didn't intend to cause harm," he said gently, "but that's the thing about prejudice, it doesn't always announce itself. It creeps in, coloring our perceptions without us even realizing it." Emily took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what she had to do, even though every fiber of her being wanted to run and hide. With trembling legs, she stepped forward, facing the small crowd that had gathered around them. "I need to say something," Emily began, her voice trembling. She turned to Lila and Mr. Richards, meeting their eyes with difficulty. "I made a terrible mistake today. I jumped to conclusions based on nothing but my own prejudices, and I hurt both of you in the process. I am so sorry." Lila's eyes widened in surprise, while Mr. Richards' expression softened slightly. Emily continued, her words coming faster now, driven by the need to make things right. "I never should have accused you, Lila. I should have taken the time to understand instead of making assumptions. My actions were wrong, and they go against everything I'm supposed to stand for as a police officer." Emily's voice faltered as she fought back tears, her gaze dropping in shame. "Mr. Richards, you're absolutely right about the harm assumptions like mine can cause. I see that now, and I'm deeply ashamed of my actions." The crowd around them remained silent, listening intently to Emily's words. Some nodded in agreement, while others looked on with sympathy. Emily took a deep breath, her voice growing steadier with determination. "I want you both to know that I take full responsibility for what I did." As she spoke, Emily felt a heavy weight being lifted off her shoulders, but it was quickly replaced by an overwhelming sense of guilt. How many times had she made similar assumptions in the past? How many people had she hurt without even realizing it? The realization hit her hard. This wasn't just about today, it was about her entire approach to her job, her interactions with the community she was supposed to serve. Emily knew that an apology wasn't enough. She needed to change, to grow, to become the kind of officer who truly protected everyone. As the crowd began to disperse and Mr. Richards gently led Lila away, Emily remained frozen in place, her mind racing with thoughts of how she could make amends, not just to Lila and Mr. Richards, but to everyone she had wronged through her biased actions. Emily left the supermarket in a daze, the events of the day replaying over and over in her mind. As she drove home, the weight of her actions pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. She couldn't shake the image of Lila's terrified face or the disappointment in Mr. Richards' eyes. When she finally arrived home, Emily collapsed onto her couch, her body trembling. She buried her face in her hands, tears slipping through her fingers. How could I have been so wrong? She whispered to the empty room. That night, Emily tossed and turned in bed, unable to find peace. Every time she closed her eyes, memories flooded her mind, not just of today but of other incidents throughout her career. She saw the faces of people she had stopped, questioned, and treated with suspicion, all based on her own prejudices. The next morning, Emily called in sick to work. She couldn't bear the thought of putting on her uniform, not when she felt so unworthy of it. Instead, she spent the day poring over her past cases, her stomach twisting as she recognized patterns in her behavior that she had never noticed before. By the third day, Emily knew she needed more time to process everything. She requested a week off from her captain, who agreed, hearing the anguish in her voice. With the time ahead of her, Emily decided to use it wisely. She began researching bias in policing, reading articles, and watching documentaries that opened her eyes to the systemic issues she was a part of. Each new piece of information felt like a punch to the gut, but Emily forced herself to keep going. She started keeping a journal, pouring her thoughts and feelings onto the pages. As she wrote, Emily began to see a path forward, a way not just to change herself but to potentially make a difference in her department. I can't undo what I've done, Emily wrote one night, her pen flying across the page. But I can learn from it. I can do better. I have to do better. With trembling hands, Emily knocked on Mr. Richards' door. Her heart raced as she waited, wondering if they would even want to see her. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened and Mr. Richards stood before her. "Officer Thompson," he said, his voice calm but cautious. Emily swallowed hard. "Mr. Richards, I came to apologize again. I know this doesn't change what happened, but I needed to say it face to face." Mr. Richards studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. Emily followed him into a cozy living room, where he gestured for her to sit on the couch. Mr. Richards settled into an armchair opposite her, his eyes never leaving her face. "Mr. Richards, I'm so sorry for what I did to Lila," Emily began, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been thinking a lot and I realize now how wrong I was." Mr. Richards leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "Officer Thompson, what happened to Lila wasn't just an isolated incident. It's part of a much larger problem that we've faced our entire lives," he said, taking a deep breath before continuing. "Every day we wake up knowing we could be judged, questioned, or worse, simply because of the color of our skin. It wears you down over time." Emily listened, her heart heavy, as Mr. Richards recounted story after story of the discrimination his family had faced. He told her about job interviews that mysteriously fell through, about being followed in stores, about the constant fear of being stopped while driving. "And Lila," Mr. Richards said, his voice softening, "she's had to watch all of this since she was a little girl. It's shaped her entire view of the world. She's always been shy, but the constant stress and fear have made her so anxious, so on edge in public places." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she began to truly grasp the impact of her actions and the larger system she was a part of. Mr. Richards leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant as memories of Lila's childhood resurfaced. "When Lila was just 6, we took her to the park for a birthday picnic," he began, his voice softened by nostalgia. "She was so excited to play with the other kids." Emily listened intently, her heart growing heavier with each word. "But as soon as we arrived, the other parents started calling their children away," Mr. Richards continued, his voice laced with pain. "One mother even told her daughter not to play with those people. Lila didn't understand why no one wanted to be her friend." Emily felt a lump form in her throat as she pictured a young Lila, confused and hurt on what should have been a joyful day. Mr. Richards went on, sharing story after story. He told Emily about Lila's first day of school, when her teacher assumed she couldn't read as well as the other kids. He described the time a store clerk followed Lila around, accusing her of shoplifting when she was simply looking for a birthday gift for her mother. With each story, Emily's guilt deepened. She began to see how these experiences had slowly eroded Lila's confidence, shaping her into the anxious young woman she was today. When Lila reached high school, Mr. Richards said, his voice tinged with sadness, she had learned to make herself as small and unnoticed as possible. She stopped raising her hand in class, even when she knew the answers. She avoided crowded places, afraid of drawing attention to herself. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she thought about her own actions at the supermarket, realizing how she had added yet another painful experience to Lila's already heavy burden. "Mr. Richards," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible, "I had no idea. I'm so sorry." Mr. Richards nodded, acknowledging her words. "It's not just about one incident, Officer Thompson. It's about a lifetime of experiences that have taught Lila to fear the world around her. As Emily listened, she felt something shift inside her. The weight of her actions, combined with the stories Mr. Richards shared, planted a seed of change in her heart. She knew that simply feeling sorry wasn't enough. She had to do better to be better. When Emily returned home, her mind was still reeling from her conversation with Mr. Richards. She sat down at her kitchen table, staring blankly at her laptop screen. With trembling fingers, she typed "effects of racial discrimination" into the search bar. As the results loaded, Emily took a deep breath and clicked on the first article titled "The Lasting Impact of Racial Bias." Her eyes widened as she read about the psychological toll of constant prejudice. She learned how repeated experiences of discrimination could lead to anxiety, depression, and a host of other mental health issues. Determined to grasp more, Emily delved deeper, discovering documentaries that shared personal stories of individuals who had faced racial discrimination. As she watched, tears streamed down her face, the stories resonating with her, reminding her of Lila's experiences. One documentary in particular struck her profoundly. It featured a young black man who described being constantly followed in stores just like Lila. Emily paused the video, her hand covering her mouth as she realized how often she might have caused similar pain without even realizing it. Emily spent hours reading articles, watching videos, and educating herself. She learned about microaggressions, systemic racism, and the concept of white privilege. Each new piece of information shifted her perspective, opening her eyes to a reality she had never fully acknowledged before. As the night wore on, Emily found herself on a website about implicit bias. She took a test that revealed her own unconscious prejudices. The results shook her deeply, but instead of becoming defensive, she felt driven to change. Emily jotted down notes, bookmarked pages, and created a reading list for herself. She was determined to continue this journey of education and self-reflection. As she learned more about the experiences of those she had unfairly judged in the past, Emily's worldview began to transform. Nervously, Emily stood at the entrance of the community center, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open, stepping into a room filled with people from diverse backgrounds. Conversations halted as heads turned to look at her, and a wave of discomfort washed over her. She spotted an empty chair near the back and quickly made her way to it, avoiding eye contact as she sat down. She caught snippets of conversations around her. People were discussing local issues, sharing personal stories, and expressing their frustrations with the system. The meeting began, and Emily listened intently as community members took turns speaking about their experiences. A young man stood up and recounted a recent encounter with the police that left him feeling humiliated and scared. Emily's heart sank as she recognized some of her own past behaviors in the officer's actions. As the meeting progressed, Emily found herself becoming more engaged. She leaned forward in her chair, hanging on every word. The stories shared were eye-opening, revealing a side of the community she had never seen before. During a break, Emily hesitantly approached a small group of people. She introduced herself, her voice trembling but determined. "I'm here to learn," she said softly. "I want to understand how I can be a better officer for this community." The group welcomed her, though some remained cautious. An older woman named Mrs. Johnson smiled warmly at Emily. "It takes courage to come here and listen," she said. "We appreciate that you're trying to understand." Over the following weeks, Emily attended more meetings and events, each time feeling a little more comfortable. She began to recognize familiar faces and engage in deeper conversations. She heard stories of struggle, resilience, and hope. At one event, Emily found herself in a discussion about police reform. Instead of becoming defensive, she listened carefully to the concerns being raised. She shared some of her own experiences and admitted her past mistakes. The conversation was difficult but productive, and Emily left feeling both challenged and inspired. As Emily continued to attend these meetings, her determination to become a better police officer grew stronger. She began to see her role in the community in a new light, not just as an enforcer of laws, but as a protector and supporter of all people. Taking a deep breath, Emily stood outside Sergeant Davis's office. Her heart raced, but she knew this conversation was necessary. She knocked on the door, her knuckles barely making a sound. "Come in," Sergeant Davis called out. Emily entered, her posture rigid and her eyes filled with determination. "Sergeant Davis, do you have a moment? I need to talk to you about something important." The sergeant looked up from his paperwork and noticed the serious expression on Emily's face. "Of course, Officer Thompson, have a seat." Emily sat down, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. She took another deep breath and began, "Sir, I made a mistake recently at the local supermarket. I let my biases cloud my judgment and unfairly accused someone of theft. Sergeant Davis leaned forward, his brow furrowed with concern. Go on, he said gently. Emily recounted the incident with Lila Richards, her voice trembling slightly as she described her actions and the pain she had caused. She explained how the experience had opened her eyes to her own prejudices and the need for change. I've been attending community meetings and events, Emily continued. I'm trying to learn and understand better. I wanted you to know about this incident and my efforts to improve. Sergeant Davis listened attentively, his expression softening as Emily spoke. When she finished, he nodded slowly. Officer Thompson, I appreciate your honesty. It takes a lot of courage to admit a mistake like this. Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. Sergeant Davis continued, I'm impressed with your willingness to change and your commitment to self-improvement. This kind of self-reflection is exactly what we need in our department. Thank you, sir, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. I want you to know that you have my full support, Sergeant Davis assured her. Continue your journey of learning and growth. If you need any resources or assistance, don't hesitate to ask. Emily nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and determination. I will, sir. Thank you for understanding. As she stood up to leave, Sergeant Davis added, Emily, what you're doing is important. Keep it up. You have the potential to make a real difference in our community. Emily's journey of self-improvement continued as she sought ways to actively engage with her community. On a sunny Saturday morning, she found herself standing in front of the local community center, feeling a blend of nervousness and excitement. She took a deep breath and opened the door. Inside, she was greeted by the warm smile of Mrs. Johnson, the center's coordinator. Thompson, it's wonderful to see you here. Are you ready to help today? Emily nodded, her voice filled with determination. Yes, ma'am, I'm here to do whatever I can. Over the next few weeks, Emily became a regular volunteer at the center. She helped serve meals to the elderly, tutored struggling students, and even organized a clothing drive for families in need. With each passing day, she felt her heart opening more and more to the people she had once viewed with suspicion. One afternoon, while Emily was helping a young boy with his math homework, she noticed his mother watching them with a mixture of gratitude and surprise. The woman approached Emily hesitantly. Officer Thompson, I want to thank you for helping my son, she said softly. I never thought I'd see a police officer doing something like this. Emily felt a lump form in her throat. I'm just trying to do what's right, she responded, her voice thick with emotion. In addition to her volunteer work, Emily began attending workshops on inclusion and bias training. At first, Emily felt out of place, surrounded by social workers and community leaders. But as she listened to their stories and experiences, she found herself nodding in agreement, recognizing her own past mistakes in their words. During one particularly impactful session, the facilitator asked everyone to share a moment when they realized their own biases. When it was Emily's turn, she hesitated for a moment before recounting the incident with Lila at the supermarket. As she spoke, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. That moment changed everything for me, Emily concluded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I realized I had to do better, not just for myself but for everyone in this community. As the weeks turned into months, Emily noticed a change in herself. She found herself smiling more, listening more attentively to people's concerns, and approaching situations with newfound empathy. Her colleagues at the police station began to notice as well, commenting on her kinder demeanor and improved relationship with the public. Emily felt drawn back to the supermarket where her journey of self-reflection had begun. At first, she felt a pang of discomfort as she walked through the automatic doors, remembering the painful incident with Lila, but she pushed through those feelings, determined to make amends. On her first visit, Emily approached the store manager, Mr. Thompson. I'd like to help out here if that's okay, she said, her voice tinged with hope. I want to make things right. Mr. Thompson, surprised but impressed by her initiative, agreed. From that day on, Emily became a familiar face in the store during her off hours. She started with small gestures, offering to help elderly customers reach items on high shelves or assisting parents struggling with demanding children. Her uniform was replaced with casual clothes, but her badge of kindness shone brightly. One day, Emily noticed a young woman looking lost and confused in the produce section. Instead of jumping to conclusions, she approached with a warm smile. Hi, can I help you find something? She asked kindly. The woman looked relieved. Oh, thank you. I'm new in town and I can't seem to find the organic section. Emily's eyes lit up. No problem at all. I'd be happy to show you. As the weeks passed, regular customers began to recognize Emily. They greeted her with smiles and waves. Some even stopped to chat. The store employees also noticed the change in her. They saw how she patiently helped a nervous mother calm her crying toddler, or how she spent extra time explaining product labels to an elderly man. Mr. Thompson couldn't help but comment on the positive shift. "You know, Emily," he said one day, "I've noticed a real difference in the atmosphere here since you started helping out. The customers seem more at ease, and there's a sense of community that I've never felt before." Emily felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. She knew she still had a long way to go, but hearing that her efforts were making a difference gave her hope. As Emily continued her volunteer work at the supermarket, she found herself drawn to helping those who appeared anxious or overwhelmed, just as Lila had been. She remembered how her own lack of understanding had caused pain, and she was determined to do better. One quiet afternoon, Emily noticed a young man standing frozen in the middle of an aisle, his eyes darting nervously from shelf to shelf. She approached him slowly, careful not to startle him. "Hi," she said softly, "is everything okay? Can I help you find something?" The man looked at her, relief washing over his face. "I can't find the cereal I need. There are so many options and I don't know where to look." Emily smiled warmly. "That's no problem at all. Let's find it together, okay?" As they walked through the store, Emily shared a bit of her own story. "You know, I used to think that everyone should be able to handle busy places like this easily. But I've learned that's not true. We all have our own challenges." The young man nodded, listening intently. "I made a huge mistake once," Emily continued, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "I judged someone who was overwhelmed, and that experience taught me a crucial lesson about understanding and kindness." When they finally located the cereal, the man's face lit up with gratitude. "It means a lot that you took the time to help me," he said. Emily's heart swelled with warmth. "This is what we're here for," she replied softly. "To help each other." Over time, Emily became known as the person anyone could turn to if they felt anxious or lost in the store. She frequently shared her own experiences, using them to connect with others and to spread a message of inclusion. "We're all different," she would tell those she assisted. "And that's what makes our community special. The key is to be patient and understanding with one another." As weeks turned into months, the transformation in Emily became increasingly apparent. Her once rigid demeanor softened, replaced by a genuine warmth and empathy that touched everyone she met. News of Emily's change spread, and more community members began to open up to her. She found herself invited to neighborhood barbecues, local meetings, and even family gatherings. Each interaction taught her something new, broadening her perspective and deepening her understanding of the diverse experiences within her community. During one of these gatherings, Emily found herself in a heartfelt conversation with Mr. Torres, a local businessman whom she had once viewed with unjust suspicion. "Officer Thompson," he said, his eyes reflecting sincere warmth, "I never thought I'd say this, but you have become a true asset to our community. Your journey shows us that change is possible." A wave of emotion washed over Emily. "I can't thank everyone enough for giving me a second chance," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. "You've helped me see the world in an entirely new light." As she looked around at the smiling faces, Emily realized that her role as a police officer had taken on a new meaning. She wasn't just enforcing laws, she was building bridges, fostering understanding, and creating a sense of unity within her community. This realization hit Emily with profound clarity. She now understood that her path to redemption wasn't just about fixing past mistakes. It was about using her position to actively promote peace and inclusion, to be a force for positive change in a world that desperately needed it. Emily's tireless efforts to alter her behavior and mindset began to bear fruit. Her genuine transformation was evident to those around her. The once rigid and biased officer had become a beacon of compassion and understanding in the neighborhood. One sunny afternoon, as Emily helped organize a community garden project, she overheard volunteers whispering their appreciation. "Can you believe how much Officer Thompson has changed?" one woman said to another. "She has become such a positive force in our community." Emily felt a deep warmth spread through her chest at these words. Although she never sought recognition for her efforts, knowing that people saw and valued her growth meant the world to her. Unbeknownst to Emily, Lila and Mr. Richards were observing her progress from a distance. They had heard about her volunteer work, her involvement in community events, and her genuine efforts to educate herself and others about inclusion. The journey of redemption Emily had embarked upon was not just transforming her own life but was also leaving a lasting impact on those around her, showing that true change and understanding were indeed possible. One evening, as Mr. Richards and Lila sat together in the living room, he broached the subject. "Leah dear," he said gently, "I've been reflecting on Officer Thompson. Have you noticed how much she has changed since that day?" Lila nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I have, Dad. It's really remarkable. She seems like a completely different person now." Mr. Richards smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I think it might be time for us to reach out to her. What do you think?" Lila hesitated for a moment, memories of that painful day in the supermarket flashing through her mind. But then she recalled the stories she'd heard about Emily's dedication to making amends, her volunteer work, and her efforts to understand and support people like herself. "You're right, Dad," Lila said, her voice gaining strength. "I think it's time to give her a chance to truly make things right." Mr. Richards squeezed his daughter's hand, proud of her willingness to open her heart. "How about inviting her over for dinner next week? It would be a good opportunity to talk and show her that we recognize the positive changes she's made." Lila nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "That sounds like a great idea, Dad. I think I'm ready to give her a chance." The Richards home was filled with the aroma of a home-cooked meal as they prepared for their special guest. Lila's hands trembled slightly as she set the table, her nerves still on edge from the memory of that day at the supermarket. But her father's comforting presence helped calm her racing heart. The doorbell rang and Mr. Richards answered it with a warm smile. "Officer Thompson, welcome to our home," he said, gesturing for Emily to come inside. Emily entered, carrying a bouquet of flowers. "Thank you for inviting me, Mr. Richards," she said, her voice brimming with genuine gratitude. "And please call me Emily." As they sat down to dinner, the initial awkwardness gradually faded. Mr. Richards steered the conversation, asking Emily about her recent community involvement. "It's been eye-opening," Emily shared, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "I've learned so much from the people I've met. It's changed the way I see my role as a police officer." Lila, who had been quiet for most of the meal, finally spoke up. "I've heard about the work you've been doing," she said softly. "The community center mentioned how you've been helping people with social anxieties." Emily's face lit up with a warm glow as she turned to Lila. "Yes, it's become very important to me. I wanted to understand and assist people who might be in similar situations to yours." Lila took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I want you to know that I appreciate the effort you've made to change. It means a lot to see someone take responsibility like this." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. "Lila, I can't express how deeply sorry I am for what happened that day. Your forgiveness means more to me than you could ever know." Mr. Richards watched the exchange with pride, seeing the growth in both women. "Emily," he said, "your actions have had a ripple effect in our community. People are noticing the change, and it's inspiring others to be more understanding and inclusive." Emily wiped away a tear, overwhelmed by the kindness and forgiveness she was receiving. "Thank you both for giving me this chance. I promise to keep working hard to make our community a better place for everyone." As the evening continued, the bonds between them grew stronger, marked by mutual respect and understanding. In that warm, inviting space, a new chapter began, one of healing, hope, and the power of second chances. As the dinner continued, Mr. Richards leaned back in his chair, his expression growing serious. "Emily, I want you to understand that while we appreciate your efforts, the challenges Lila faces are ongoing." Emily nodded, showing genuine concern. "I'd like to hear more about that if you're willing to share." Mr. Richards looked at Lila, who gave a small nod of approval. He continued, "Every day is a new battle for Lila. Simple tasks that many take for granted can be overwhelming for her." Lila spoke up, her voice soft yet resolute. "Going to the supermarket that day was a big step for me. I've been trying hard, but sometimes it feels like I'm moving backward." Emily listened intently, her heart aching for Lila. "I can't imagine how difficult this must be," she said gently. Mr. Richards reached out and gave Lila's hand a reassuring pat. "We found ways to cope. We practice breathing exercises, and I often accompany Lila when she needs to go out. But it's not always easy. Some days are better than others." Lila added, "I'm trying to find a job, but the thought of interviews terrifies me." Emily leaned forward, her eyes lighting up with an idea. "Have you considered working with animals? I know the local shelter is always looking for kind souls to help care for their rescues." Lila's face brightened at the suggestion. "I love animals. They don't judge." Mr. Richards smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. "That's a wonderful idea, Emily. We'll definitely look into it, won't we, Lila?" Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest as she saw the positive impact of her suggestion. "If you'd like, I could introduce you to the shelter's manager. She's a very kind and understanding person." "That would be amazing," Lila said, excitement creeping into her voice. Mr. Richards looked at Emily with gratitude. Your support means a lot to us, Emily. It's inspiring to see how far you've come. Emily felt tears welling in her eyes. I'm grateful for the chance to make things right. If there's anything I can do to help, please don't hesitate to ask. As the evening progressed, the conversation flowed more easily. Emily listened empathetically as Mr. Richards and Lila shared more about their daily struggles and small victories. She offered words of encouragement and practical suggestions when she could, her heart full of compassion for the family that had shown her so much forgiveness. The experience with the Richards family ignited a fire within Emily. She realized that her personal growth could have a broader impact if she shared her insights with her fellow officers. With renewed determination, Emily approached Sergeant Davis the next day. Sergeant, I've been thinking about ways to improve our relationship with the community, she said, her voice brimming with enthusiasm. Sergeant Davis leaned forward, intrigued. I'm all ears, Thompson. What do you have in mind? Emily took a deep breath and laid out her ideas. I believe we need more comprehensive training on bias awareness and community engagement. Our officers need to understand the impact of their actions on the people we serve. Sergeant Davis nodded thoughtfully. That's a solid idea, Thompson. How do you propose we implement it? Emily worked diligently with Sergeant Davis to develop a new training program. They brought in experts on racial bias, invited community leaders to speak, and organized interactive workshops. Emily even shared her own story, using her experiences with Lila as a powerful example of how unchecked biases can harm innocent people. As the program rolled out, Emily found herself at the forefront, leading discussions and facilitating exercises. She watched with pride as her fellow officers engaged in honest conversations about their own biases and discussed ways to build trust within the community. One afternoon, after a particularly impactful session, Officer Rodriguez approached Emily. You know, Thompson, I used to think you were just another by-the-book cop, but what you're doing here is really opening my eyes. Emily smiled, touched by her colleague's words. We're all learning together, Rodriguez. That's what matters. The shared journey of understanding and growth continued, leaving a lasting mark on both Emily and her community, weaving a narrative of transformation, empathy, and hope. As weeks passed, Emily began to notice subtle but significant changes in her fellow officers' behavior. They became more patient during calls, took the time to listen to community members, and approached situations with a newfound empathy. The positive feedback from the community filled Emily with a sense of fulfillment she had never before experienced in her career. With her growing bond with the community, Emily's role within the police department evolved. She transitioned from being a standard officer to a genuinely compassionate and understanding public servant. Her transformation did not go unnoticed. Many of her colleagues, inspired by her journey, sought her guidance. One day, a young officer named Jake approached Emily after a community outreach event. Officer Thompson, he began hesitantly, I was wondering if I could talk to you about something. Emily offered him a warm smile, sensing his nervousness. Of course, Jake. What's on your mind? Jake fidgeted with his hat, his voice trembling slightly. I've been struggling with some of the situations we face on patrol. Sometimes I'm not sure if I'm making the right decisions. The way you handle things seems different. How do you manage it? Emily's eyes softened as she recalled her own struggles. It's not always easy, Jake. But the key is to approach each situation with empathy and an open mind. Try to see beyond your first impressions and really listen to people as they speak. She shared her own experiences, including her transformative encounter with Lila and how it had reshaped her perspective. Jake listened intently, his eyes widening as he grasped the impact of unchecked biases. News of Emily's willingness to mentor spread quickly, and soon she was surrounded by colleagues eager to learn from her experiences. Emily organized informal meetings where officers could discuss challenging situations and explore more empathetic approaches. During one of these sessions, Officer Maria Rodriguez shared a story about nearly issuing fines to a group of teenagers at a park. I almost fined them for loitering, Maria admitted. But then I remembered what you said about taking time to understand the situation. It turned out they were just waiting for their parents after a community cleanup event. Emily nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of awareness we need to cultivate. Every interaction is an opportunity to build trust and understanding. Over time, the atmosphere at the precinct began to shift. Officers started sharing more stories of positive interactions with the community, and complaints against the department dwindled. The change was palpable, filling Emily with a deep sense of purpose and pride. One afternoon, as Emily patrolled the busy streets near the local mall, she spotted a sight that would have previously elicited a different reaction from her. A black mother and her young child huddled near the entrance, a cardboard sign asking for help beside them. In the past, Emily might have moved them along or cited ordinances against vagrancy. But with her newly gained perspective, she approached the scene with compassion. As she parked her patrol car and walked toward them, the mother's eyes widened with fear. She instinctively pulled her child closer, bracing for a confrontation. Emily's heart ached at the sight, but she took a deep breath, her resolve firm. "Hi there," Emily said gently, trying to reassure them. "I'm Officer Thompson. I'm here to see how I can help." The mother looked up, her fears slowly replaced by a glimmer of hope. For Emily, this was more than a simple act of kindness. It was a testament to how far she had come, a reminder of her commitment to making the community a better place for everyone. Emily crouched down to their level, her voice soft and soothing. "Hello," she said gently. "I'm Officer Thompson. Is everything okay? Can I help with anything?" The mother's lip quivered as she looked at Emily, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, officer. We have nowhere else to go." Emily's heart ached at the pain in the woman's voice. "It's all right," she assured her. "I'm not here to make you leave. I want to help. Can you tell me what's going on?" The woman, introducing herself as Tanya, began to share her story through sobs and hesitant words. She spoke of losing her job, then her apartment, and now finding herself on the streets with her 5-year-old son Marcus. As Emily listened, a profound wave of emotion washed over her. She thought about how differently she would have handled this situation just a few months ago and felt a renewed resolve to make a difference. "I understand this might not seem like it now," Emily said gently, "but there are resources available to help you and Marcus. Would you be willing to let me make a few calls and see what we can do?" Tanya nodded slowly, a glimmer of hope in her eyes for the first time. Emily spent the next hour on the phone, reaching out to local shelters and social services, using her connections to find a safe place for Tanya and Marcus to stay. Emily's transformation was evident to everyone in the community, particularly at the supermarket where her journey of change had begun. Every Saturday morning, she arrived not in her police uniform but in casual clothes, her face brightened by a warm smile. The store manager, Mr. Johnson, greeted her with a friendly wave as she donned her volunteer vest. "Good morning, Emily," Mr. Johnson said, handing her a clipboard. "Happy to have you here again." "Thank you, Mr. Johnson," Emily replied, her eyes crinkling with genuine warmth as she made her way through the aisles. Emily kept an eye out for anyone who might need help. She noticed an elderly woman struggling to reach a can on a high shelf. "Let me help with that," Emily offered, easily retrieving the item. The woman smiled at her. "Thank you, dear. You're always so helpful." Emily chatted with the woman for a few moments, ensuring she had everything she needed before moving on. As she walked, she overheard a heated argument between two customers over the last carton of milk. Drawing on her police training and newfound empathy, Emily approached the men calmly. "Is everything all right here?" she asked softly. The men, recognizing Emily, immediately lowered their voices. Emily listened to both sides of the dispute and then suggested a compromise that satisfied both parties. As they walked away, Emily reflected on how different this interaction was from her earlier confrontations. Throughout the day, Emily assisted customers with finding items, bagged groceries, and even shared stories of her personal growth with those who asked. Her presence seemed to spark a ripple of kindness and understanding throughout the store. As the day drew to a close, a young black teenager entered the store, looking nervous and out of place. Emily recognized the anxious look on his face, reminiscent of Lila's. She approached him with a gentle smile. "Hi," she said softly. "I'm Emily. Is there anything I can help you find today?" The teenager, initially wary, relaxed slightly at Emily's friendly demeanor. "I'm looking for ingredients for my mom's birthday cake," he admitted shyly. "That's wonderful," Emily exclaimed. "Let's see if we can find everything you need." As they walked through the store together, Emily shared a bit about her own journey of learning and growth. The teenager listened intently, visibly more at ease as they talked. As the summer sun bathed the city in its warm glow, Emily Thompson stood nervously in front of the police department, surrounded by her colleagues and community members gathered for a special ceremony. Chief Roberts, a tall man with graying hair, stepped up to the podium. "Today," he began, his voice resonating through the crowd, "we are here to recognize one of our own." Emily's heart raced as she listened to Chief Roberts recount her journey. He spoke of her volunteer work, her efforts to bridge the gap between the police and the community, and her commitment to fostering inclusion. Officer Thompson's dedication to change has not only transformed her as an individual but has also inspired our entire department. As Chief Roberts continued, Emily glanced around and saw familiar faces in the crowd. The Richardses were near the front, their faces beaming with pride. Lila, looking more confident than ever, gave Emily a small nod. "It is an honor," Chief Roberts announced, "to present Officer Emily Thompson with the Department Commendation for Community Service and Inclusion." The crowd erupted in applause as Emily stepped forward to accept the award. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the plaque, overwhelmed by the moment. "Thank you," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. "This journey has taught me so much about the true meaning of community and service. I am grateful for the opportunity to make a difference and promise to continue working hard to promote understanding and inclusion in our community." As Emily stepped back, her fellow officers surrounded her with congratulations and pats on the back. Sergeant Davis approached with a proud smile. "You've come a long way, Thompson," he said warmly. "Your dedication has inspired changes throughout the force. We're implementing new training programs based on your experiences." Emily felt a surge of pride, knowing that her personal growth was creating a ripple effect throughout the department. When the ceremony ended, community members came forward to shake her hand and share their thanks. Over the following weeks, Lila found herself drawn to the community center where Emily volunteered. The once timid young woman was gradually building her confidence, inspired by Emily's journey of growth and transformation. On a sunny afternoon, Lila took a deep breath and walked through the doors of the center. Emily's face lit up with a warm smile upon seeing her. "Lila, it's great to see you here," Emily said, walking over to greet her. Lila nervously tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Hi, Emily. I was wondering if there might be a way I could help out here." Emily's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Absolutely. We're always looking for volunteers. Did you have something specific in mind?" Lila hesitated for a moment, then spoke softly. "I was thinking maybe we could work together on something for people with social anxiety. You know, like what I've been dealing with." Emily's face softened with understanding. "That's a wonderful idea, Lila. Your experience could truly help others who are struggling." In the weeks that followed, Emily and Lila worked side by side to develop a support group for individuals with social anxiety. They created a safe space where people could share their experiences and learn coping strategies. Lila was amazed at how much she enjoyed helping others. She found strength in sharing her own story, and her confidence grew with each passing day. Emily watched with pride as Lila blossomed, her once timid demeanor giving way to a gentle but assured presence. During one of their sessions, Lila stood before the group, her voice steady as she spoke. "I know how frightening it can be to face the world when you're feeling anxious," she said, "but I've learned that small steps can lead to big changes." As Emily sat among the participants, a lump formed in her throat. She remembered the scared young woman she had met in the supermarket and marveled at the transformation before her. As the group shared their experiences, Lila and Emily worked seamlessly together, offering support and guidance. Their partnership became a powerful force for positive change within the community. After the session, Emily approached Lila with a warm smile. "You were incredible today," Emily said warmly. "Look how far you've come." Lila's eyes shimmered with unshed tears of joy. "I couldn't have done it without you, Emily. Your support and understanding made all the difference." As the community gathered for the annual Unity Day celebration, Emily and Lila stood at the forefront of the event. Their shared journey had become a symbol of progress and hope for everyone present. Standing next to Lila, Emily's heart swelled with emotion as she reflected on how far she had come, from a rigid, biased officer to someone who had embraced true understanding. When it was Lila's turn to speak, she approached the microphone with newfound confidence. Her voice, once timid and hesitant, now rang clear and strong as she addressed the crowd. "A year ago, I was lost and afraid," Lila began, her eyes shining. "But today I stand before you because of one person's willingness to change." She turned to Emily with a warm smile. Emily's transformation wasn't just about her. It was about all of us learning to see beyond appearances and understand each other's struggles. As Lila continued her heartfelt speech, the audience was visibly moved. Tears welled up in the eyes of many, including Emily, who felt overwhelmed by the profound impact of their actions. "We all have the power to make a difference," Lila said, her voice choked with emotion. "When we open our hearts and minds, we can create a community where everyone feels safe and valued." Emily felt her own tears streaming freely now. She thought of the frightened young woman she had met in the supermarket and marveled at the strong, inspiring person Lila had become. The weight of her past actions and the joy of Lila's transformation washed over her in waves. As Lila concluded her speech, the entire community rose to their feet in a thunderous standing ovation. The applause was deafening, But even more powerful was the sense of unity that filled the air. People from all walks of life came together, embracing the lesson that true change begins with understanding and empathy. If you enjoyed this story, leave a comment below, give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. See you in the next video.